Hey everybody, real quick before we get into the finale of Indieween, I just wanted to give you a heads up. This particular video might unsettle some folks visually, as the game is defaulted to a 45-degree FOV, which is intentional by the dev as they use it to create a sense of claustrophobia, but more on that in the spooky section later. If extreme FOVs like this make you feel queasy, it might be best to pull up another tab while this video plays, or maybe give this one a skip, as I kept the default FOV on in order to respect the dev's vision. If you do end up having to tap out of this video, TLDW, Lost in Vivo is awesome and you should buy it, just adjust the FOV before you get started. Warnings out of the way, welcome to the final game of Indieween 2021. We've racked up a whole bunch of spooky games from indies all around, and even when we add up all the prices, they total less than the price of a single AAA game. So today's game is by one Kira, and if that name sounds familiar, that's because they're the mind behind the previously discovered Spookies Jump Scare Mansion. Kira's been in the scene for a while now, and on top of Spookies has also made appearances in the Dread X collections, a silly game about college basketball, and a few other odds and ends over on their Steam and itch pages. Most notably in recent years is today's game, Lost in Vivo. Lost in Vivo is a first-person horror game where you play as someone who's just taken a nice walk with their service doggy, Dani, but then oh no, Dani was sucked into the sewer drain because the local government can't be bothered to do basic maintenance around town. Time to go down to the dark depths of the underground to save Dani and confront the truly freaky looking horrors in there. Before we get into this, I just want to say right off the bat that this game kind of feels like it was Kira going, yeah, I know I've been doing silly spooky for a while now, but let me show you some top quality nightmare fuel. This game is not like Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion or offerings like Uktina 64 in the Dread X collection. This is spooky. You've been warned. Let's take the time to go over the core gameplay. Lost in Vivo is a first-person horror game where you can walk, run, interact with certain objects with the E key, and occasionally shoot at things. You have an inventory that's mostly filled with things from before Dani got sucked into the sewer hell, but it also contains your weapons, ammos, and the tapes you'll collect. We'll get to those tapes in a second. Most of Lost in Vivo consists of you exploring mostly open format levels where you'll need to brave various horrors to complete objectives and move on to the next area in hopes of saving your doggy. Now, something that should be of note here is that while you do get your hands on some melee weapons and firearms, not all enemies are killable, and some will keep coming back after you've incapacitated them. You get a hammer and a kitchen knife that do decent damage, but put you much too close for comfort with some of these enemies. Then there's also the broken pistol you get fairly early on, that shoots pretty good except when it doesn't. You also get the staple of horror games, the shotgun. Except there's one key difference here that you might not have noticed unless you bothered to read through the item description. It's a riot shotgun in the truest sense of the word, and it's loaded with non-lethal salt pellets. These can kill certain enemies that are weak to salt for some reason. However, for pretty much everything else, you're gonna be going crazy thinking that you're missing shots or something, but the reality is that you're presently trying to kill something with non-lethal rounds. Most of the time, if you can, it's best to just run away from enemies that are chasing you and really take advantage of the fact that you get about a 5-second head start between going through doors. Next, we've got the puzzles and objectives, so to speak. It's less elaborate tile puzzle that takes about 2 hours, or figure out this elaborate riddle that involves you finding seemingly inconsequential doohickeys and putting them in a place you'd least expect, and more along the lines of, you need to go here and do this to advance. However, going there involves going through this very spooky area, and doing the thing will put you in immediate danger. The best example of this I can think of without spoiling too much of the story is that early on in the game, you'll be trapped in a neglected subway station. You gotta get the train moving again so you can catch up to Dani, but the power is so poorly wired in this part of the subway network that the very act of passing through this station while the lights were on threw the breaker, and now the train can't move. So you gotta go into the engineering room, figure out through notes that you gotta switch off the breakers in each major area of the subway station before you try to throw the main breaker to get the tracks back on, but the problem is, switching off those breakers will kill the lights in each part of the subway, and you're not alone in this station. We've also got using the map, which is simple enough from the outset, save for one key feature that arguably could have gone into the spooky section, but I made the call to put it here in the gameplay. Usually every level you'll find a physical map somewhere early on, and it gives you a rough lay of the land. You don't get an exact pinpoint of where you are or what direction you're bearing in, but the game does highlight whatever room you're in so you can figure out where you are that way. Here's the kicker though, the maps are unfinished. The subway map has a lot of missing areas because they were halfway through renovating the station, so a lot of half-dug tunnels aren't marked. The The mines are half collapsed, and some of the notes left by the miners mention that there are areas that they weren't told about at all or certainly did not dig, and some portions of the levels just don't have a map. Why is this potentially spooky? Well, take a wild guess at what areas you're going to be chased through. Lost in Vivo has a way of forcing you into areas where you'll have no bearings on where you are, and then putting the monster in the room with you, which results in a lot of solid chase sequences where you're running like hell and really hoping that you aren't about to run into a dead end inside of these tunnels. Rounding out the gameplay, we have a few odds and ends. The first of which is lockpicking, which is something you'll need to do to progress in certain areas, usually during a time when you really don't want to have your back turned to the rest of the room. You'll need to find a set of pick locks wherever you are, and when you see the door with the padlock on it, you'll need to take about 10 seconds to get the thing open. Except that lockpicking isn't a guarantee on the first try, and you can find yourself in a world of hurt real fast. Then last but certainly not least, we have the tapes. The tapes are items that you can find in-game, which you can replay at boomboxes, which are usually found at the beginning of the level near the safe room, and playing these tapes will take you to new areas where, something is certainly happening. Some of these tapes have in-lore significance, such as tape number 3 being referenced as a catalyst for whatever the heck is going on in the later half of the game. These tapes are also entirely optional if you want to get through the game really fast, but are easily some of the spookiest moments Lost in Vivo has to offer. Okay, time for the good stuff. And hoo boy, there's a lot of spookies in here. Let's start with the level design. Most of Lost in Vivo's levels are a network of rooms connected with narrow passageways which you aren't likely going to be getting around something that confronts you within them. Most of the rooms are one way in, one way out. So if something's in there with you, you're not gonna have a good time. Couple this with how dark a lot of the areas are, and you're traversing areas that should be abandoned, and you've got yourself a tense and claustrophobic environment. Now, let's talk about that 45-degree FOV for a minute now that we're in the right place to do so. I was initially iffy about it when I popped into the option menu to see what was up with the graphical setup before I started recording, but after making it through most of the game, I can see why Kira chose specifically to tell the player in the option menus that the narrow FOV is intentional to get the desired effect of claustrophobia, cause it works. A lot of these hallways would get the job done for them spookies, but only having a very narrow field of vision makes them that much worse when you're creeping through an area and you can hardly see your peripherals. Take a look at this clip here when I'm in a narrow hallway where I know there are enemies further down the hall, so I'm ADSing with my pistol so that I can take care of them while conserving my ammo. This probably is the most tense I felt playing a horror game since we did Cry of Fear last year. It's a bummer though that while this effect is amazing, there are people that will be turned off by it due to getting sick from low FOV. At least if that's the case for you, there's always the option to just crank up the FOV in spite of what the original intention was and just partially miss out on the experience. Then to go with the level design, there's the environments. As expected, everything is dark, dingy, and real grimy at times, and most of the areas you go in are completely abandoned. This is par for the course in your spooky games, but what I enjoy about Lost in Vivo's take on it is that the transition from dark and dingy, but relatively mundane, to clearly supernatural is never jarring. A lot of games treat the transition into nightmare mode like it's an on and off switch. For example, as much as I love the Dead Space series, there's a lot of suddenly everything is abruptly spooky, which works great on occasion, but treating the nightmare stuff like a toggleable switch gets predictable and the bad kind of jarring after a while. In Lost in Vivo, you'll find yourself in some already pretty grimy labs, but as you get closer to the holding areas of those labs, you'll see that they were experimenting with some unknown substance that seems to allow the scientists to create some sort of twisted life, so by the time you're in the fleshy rooms, this is natural progression. Something I'll go over real quick here too while we're on the subject of the aesthetic of Lost in Vivo is that I noticed this seems to be one of the early examples of entries into the whole haunted PS1 aesthetic, with the only other earlier example I can think of off the top of my head being the Pet Cop ARG, which while presented as quite literally a haunted PS1 game, I'm struggling to think of earlier entries into this aesthetic, with the majority of what comes to mind when I think of playable games with the haunted PS1 aesthetic are stuff from early 2020, like the first Dread X collection or Earl's Day Off. While I can't say for certain if it was intentional or not to start the whole haunted PS1 aesthetic, on the itch page, the game is shown off as a PS1 disc jewel case, and I don't think this is a matter of constraint because Kira has worked in Unity before with the HD renovation of Spooky, and we've seen that Unity is capable of much better looking and much worse looking games than this, and the sort of bitmash pseudo PS1 style works for the game. And it wouldn't be a spooky section without a once-over of the monsters. I won't get too into it here as I feel that a good number of the monsters are directly related to story spoiler elements, but that being said, Lost in Vivo excels at making no monsters seem mundane or overused. Each monster is unique to an area, and the areas are built to bring out the best in the monsters. While some lesser enemies do return in certain areas, and other, more prominent monsters will appear before the area that they're featured in, very briefly, as if to tell you that the thing has officially noticed you, each monster feels unique and your time with them is memorable. We'll talk a bit more about this in the story spoilers section though, cause I'm gonna cut it off here. And then if spooky levels and spooky monsters weren't enough for you, we've got some fantastic sound design in this game too. Lost in Vivo has a great soundtrack, which is made even better by the judicious use of it in the right moments, as sometimes the silence is far scarier than even the creepiest audio track. Then we've got the other elements of sound design, like the effects and the noises that some of the enemies make. You'll get prompted every time you boot the game up to wear a set of headphones, as Lost in Vivo uses positional audio, and boy howdy does it. It's so well implemented that the sounds of a door closing behind you or random ambience is enough to make you jump. One of my personal favorite moments in the game is when you go into an enclosed area where your back is facing the only way out of the room, and as you examine an object, glass suddenly starts breaking, positioned right behind you. By the way, this is not relevant footage of that scene. I'm intentionally not showing the correct footage because I don't want to spoil the spookies, but oh boy, it was good. Finally, to round things out, we have the fact that the game just straight up messes with you at times. Again, for spoiler protection, I'm not going to get into too specific examples here, but I'd put some of these on par with the Scarecrow's intro in Batman Arkham Asylum with how well they integrated these spooks into the game, to the point that at times you won't even realize that something particularly freaky was actually the game working as intended. I feel bad enough mentioning that these exist though, as now you're going to be put on guard for it if you decide to pick the game up. So let's go over the plot and premise of Lost in Vivo now that we've covered the meat and potatoes of the game. The basic premise at the start of the game is that you are an unnamed blank slate of a character whose only defining elements are you've experienced some sort of trauma or phobia at some point in the past, and now your caregiver is recommending that you start in vivo exposure therapy to see if that helps. That's a real thing, by the way, but I don't know any more than that. In the meantime, you're just taking walks with your service dog, Dani, and just after seeing a discarded tabloid talking about how a Dr. B is exposing some shadowy experiments being done somewhere, suddenly a storm whips up and Dani is sucked down the drain. You follow Dani down there to find out that something is definitely very wrong beneath the city. Okay, spoiler time. As always, you know what to do if you don't want them, but I'm going to urge you all that if you haven't picked up the game yet and plan on doing so, skip ahead, as knowing these plot details will likely ruin some of the spookies for you. Well, you've all been warned. The player goes in after Dani and finds themselves in an expansive sewer system that seems to be inhabited by a homeless person who for the time being is nowhere to be found. What is found, however, is a note from whoever's down there saying that some sort of creature wanted his eyes and that he ended up giving them over to this creature because they were starting to play tricks on him. Shortly thereafter, you're attacked by an eyeless homeless man in the sewers before you descend deeper into them to find a strange zoo or perhaps a prison holding all sorts of deformed monstrosities behind bars in the lower sewers. But one of these makeshift cages is broken with no creature inside. You find a save room that mysteriously takes you down to the subway station, but oh dear, you're in a neglected part of town where you gotta get things sorted for yourself because some dude just got away on another train with Dani, and he kinda looks like the save station statue, come to think of it. Here in the subway, you'll start to learn more about Jane, the woman who is now a ghost that will attack you as you throw the breakers, and unfortunately, I'm going to essentially skip all of Jane's backstory here as there are a lot of sensitive themes and elements to them, and that's a one-way ticket to the demonetization station here on the YouTube line. Now, before the usual ornery comments about YouTube stifling creators or how the site is going downhill because we can't do this, that, or the other thing come up, I'd like to remind you all that people have been saying that kind of crap for 15 years now, and frankly, I don't feel stifled in any way because I'm discouraged from talking about sensitive topics which I have essentially zero experience in, which are better left to professionals in the relevant fields. I'm happy playing by the rules and a big fan of picking the former when it comes to evolve or die. Now moving swiftly forward, after making it past the Royal Phantom subway into the Grand Boleem Avenue station, the player will find themselves in the abandoned mines. Here we will once again find notes from somebody talking about how there seems to be something wrong with the place, as there are doorways and tunnels that are certainly not part of the mining operation here, and something is definitely lurking in there with them. And it's definitely not your doggy, by the way. There's something else inside the mines, aside from the mimic that's watching you too. Once you're out of the mines, you'll find yourself in Nizumi Testing, an abandoned laboratory of some sort where you'll find notes from a Dr. Brundle and a Dr. Piccinini, which I hope I said right. The former of which is amazed at what they can do with this new compound they made with dead tissues, or tissues that should be dead anyway, but is growing more and more alarmed by the potential ramifications of this research and is already very, very alarmed by what the latter has been doing with it. Dr. Piccinini, on the other hand, is really into these experiments and he fancies himself the king of all the rats they're doing stuff to. You see, there's this odd tape that they found that depicts an idol to an entity known as Bayagath, and the scientists that listen to it gets all sorts of crazy inspirations from the tape, but they also become obsessed with Bayagath and eventually go mad. On top of, well, everything that Dr. Piccinini is doing at Nezumi testing, he's also created an entity called Sotiris, which, while I did check the wiki on how you say that, there seems to be some infighting among the editors on its exact pronunciation, so fight me. Dr. Piccinini fancies Sotiris as his and all the rats' savior, but there's just one problem. It can't move. Well, actually it can, but it just has Weeping Angels / SCP-173 rules, which are slightly nerfed to include direct observation by cameras or artificial means, and so long as you've got it in your line of sight, you should be good. This, however, is also why Sotiris is taking everyone's eyes and wants yours next. You get the hell out of there, or at least you think you do, and then after a bit of trouble, you move on to confront this thing and save Dani. There are a few ways this can go down, but the ending you want here is to save Dani and get the hell out of the sewers. There is a secret ending though, where if you do a few things you probably shouldn't have, you can summon Bayagath and end the world. The end. So now that we've got all of that out of the way, I can talk about a few more spooky things that would otherwise be spoilery. For starters, Lost in Vivo sure as hell knows how to ratchet up tension. The best example of this is in the sewers in the early part of the game. It feels so tense during that entire section and you keep on bracing for something to come out and get you, especially after seeing those cages, but the only thing that happens to you in all of the first part of the game is encountering the homeless man who goes down in 2 bonks with a hammer. It certainly doesn't feel like that though. The other big buildup is Sotiris, who the entire game is being hinted at from the sewers on, and after the mines, you know it's real and that it knows you're here, and that all culminates in you learning just enough about Sotiris to hopefully get past it without ruining the mystique of the entity right before you confront it. Seriously, while Lost in Vivo does occasionally do jump scares and, oh, the scary monster is chasing you and your only option is to run away syndrome, it's also one of the best, if not the best, slow burns in horror I've played on this channel. So, you finished the game. Now what? A whole lot more, that's what. The first thing you can do before the obvious New Game Plus route is to unlock the Gallery of Light and Dark mode. These are easy enough to do, just go into the options and fiddle around with the gamma settings. You'll figure it out, and if you can't, it's right on the wiki. The Gallery of Light is pretty much a model museum that you can peruse at your leisure with Dani by your side. You can also pet the doggy to your heart's content here. There are a few areas in here that you can find once you've unlocked it, but I'll leave those for you to discover. Conversely, there's Dark Mode, which is a new game mode that takes place before the events of the game and seems to be a bit more on the symbolic side and feature new enemies to invade. Then we've got the New Game Plus, which I mentioned a few moments ago. New Game Plus in Lost in Vivo has a good number of changes in it, including new enemy placements, tougher enemies, a few new scares, and even randomized enemy placement if you want to get extra spicy. There's also several different endings you can get as mentioned in the story spoilers segment, so there's good enough reason to try for additional game completions, and the remixes on NG Plus keep it interesting while you're going through said endings. Then there's also the secret Midnight mode. Midnight is referenced early in the game with the discarded jewel case showing off the game. Midnight mode is essentially a different game that's a little more actiony than Lost in Vivo proper. This is a certain mode that you'll need to do a certain thing to unlock in-game that isn't explicitly stated anywhere in the game, but I'll give you a hint. Lastly, there's hunting for Easter eggs. There's quite a few Easter eggs to previous Kira titles such as Spookies Jump Scare Mansion, and some of these are a little more obvious than the others, but some are very well hidden. Have fun finding them all. Final thoughts on Lost in Vivo? Damn, it's a spooktacular game. And for $10, it's an absolute steal. If you're into all things spooky, this game is definitely for you, and I'm glad I'm saved it as the best for last. If you want to get this game, but you also want to help out Kira a little extra, I've linked the itch store page for Lost in Vivo as opposed to the Steam version, cause in case you didn't know, itch gives a better cut to indie devs than Steam or the EGS does, which helps a lot when it comes to supporting the indie scene. I also went back and put the World of Horror itch link on that video if you're interested, since Pants is back, and I checked the other games, and they're unfortunately not on itch. So, final grand total of $54.96 for everything we've covered this October. That's also assuming that you got the fancy version of Spookies Jump Scare Mansion instead of the free one. Man, we did good this year. We got a whole slew of awesome games for less than the price of a single AAA title, and we didn't even go up to the $70 price tag that AAA games are asking for now in some cases. I hope you all enjoyed this year's Indie-ween, and I hope it's inspired you to check out more indie games on the cheap instead of shelling out the big bucks for safe, stale mainstream titles. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to say that if you dug Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion and you're digging what I've shown you here in Lost in Vivo, Kiro recently announced their newest game, Lunacid, which you can go wishlist on Steam right about now. It just got announced a few days ago as I write this video, so don't expect that TBA launch window to change anytime soon or have any sort of hard date in the near future. Lunacid is styling itself as a throwback to pre-Dark Souls FromSoft games, which sounds pretty cool, and it's not like Kira is some unknown when it comes to the quality of their games. So that's gonna do her for Indie-ween. Thank you all so much for joining me on the spookiest of the months, and if you like this video and this series, I do run a Patreon where all tiers get early access to videos, plus many other cool perks among the tiers. If you can or won't though, that's cool. I'm still gonna be making these videos as best I can. Be sure to drop by our Discord and say hi too. I hope to see you all in the next video, and in the meantime, please remember to stay safe, wash your hands, wear reflective and easy to spot clothing if you're going out at night. Remember to check your candy and your children's candy this Sunday for crappy NFTs or QR codes linking to someone's god-awful podcast. Wear your mask in public indoor settings in accordance with CDC guidelines, and enjoy this cat video. Look at this boy. He's posing. Oh, what is this? What is this? What is this? This is my hair tie, which you love more than any of the toys we buy you. You caught it and then you just dropped it. There we go. Like, look at this. From when the first hair tie was thrown, you jumped off the table so fast that you messed up the place settings. And now I gotta get a new set because these are soiled. Don't you have anything to say for yourself? Anything that is not, please throw the hair tie again? Okay, I'm gonna toss it over here. You didn't even run all the way. You're a lazy chunker. Well, you gonna get it? You gonna get it? You gonna get it? Of course you're not gonna get it. No, just because someone is walking into the hallway does not mean it's time to feed you. You can wait there all you want, but you're not getting fed until designated dinner time.